Hello dear listeners, we are very honored to introduce to you to a series of interviews with the researchers of the project Precarious Labor and Peripheral Housing, the socio-economic practices of Romanian Roma in the context of changing industrial relations and uneven territorial development. They are going to talk briefly about their fieldwork, their experience as researchers and their findings. If you are interested in the many social issues we face today in the neoliberal age, especially in the post-socialist setting, or are just curious about what is the job of an anthropologist, then you are welcome to listen and share our podcast series. Today I'm here with the first guest, Hestia, who is one of the assistant researchers in the project and who is going to tell us a little bit more about her work. Hello Hestia, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm Hestia. I'm assistant researcher and I work alongside Gabriel Troc and Dana Solonean. And we work in Work Package 5, which looks at labor migration and changes in work-related behavior. So we explore personal histories of people who migrated internally or externally, trying to uncover patterns of migration and their circumstances that generate these types of movements.
Can you give us some more details about your fieldwork?
So about my fieldwork. I did my fieldwork in Baia Mare in the summer of 2021 and the spring of 2022. And I primarily focused on Roma communities like Pirita and Craica, where I talk with people with a history of migration. So the interviews were focused on issues of labor and working abroad, which means we discussed about finding work, the type of jobs they had, if they worked formally or informally, the difficulties of living and working in a foreign country, the type of payment they receive, the working and living conditions they faced, the risk of exploitation, also the investment of the money they earned.
Please tell us, what is like working as an anthropologist?
So I have to say that working as an anthropologist is for me a highly rewarding job, and I really like what I'm doing. But at the same time, it can be quite challenging, especially when you are facing these brutal realities of marginalization and racial segregation. And I want to take a bit of time to talk about the realities of these communities that I was engaged with, which are just minutes away from one of the largest cities of Romania. So both Pirita and Craica are informal settlements created by Romani people in the periphery of Baia Mare. The people living there have lost one way or another their formal accommodation. Either they were in debt or couldn't afford rent or utilities, so they settled in these empty lands. And I want to say a little bit about the living conditions because they are quite harsh. They live in improvised houses, which means the spaces are very tiny. The houses can get very cold, putting them at risk of different health problems because the houses are built from improper materials. They are not isolated. There's a lot of overcrowding. The living conditions can be quite difficult. Also, one of the biggest threats of the people living there are facing is the danger of expropriation, because these communities are built on land that they do not own. So, for example, Pirita is a community a bit further away from the city, is more isolated, is built on a former toxic waste storage space. And Craica is the other community that's more close to the city and is built on land belonging to CFR, Căile Ferate Române, which is the national railway company. And because of this, they, as I said, they are always at risk of being thrown out. For example, there is a plan for a road to be built right in the middle of where now the Pirita community is. More than this, because they do not own land, the houses that they build cannot be built very solid, because the investment would not be justified if they are just gonna be destroyed in a few years. Also, not being owners of this house means they cannot have identity papers, which of course poses a lot of challenges, because the people that live in these communities do not have these identity papers. They cannot access different social services. It creates a difficulty in finding formalized work. Also, because the houses they build are informal settlements, they do not have access to different utilities such as electricity or water. So, for example, in Craica, they have to buy electricity from the apartment buildings that they live next to at a much higher price.
I have to say this is quite interesting, and I am guessing for most the less known reality of their own city or country. Now, what can you tell us about the migrants, the focus of your research?
Now, regarding the people that migrate, so from the interviews I took, it seems that most people that migrate are actually from Craica, where the strategy of transnational migration is much more common. And it's usually paired with periods of time of formal employment in the factories from Baia Mare, such as Aramis or Ital Sofa. The people from Pirita are less likely to migrate abroad, and that is because it's necessary to have a bit of money to afford to migrate. And as I mentioned, the Pirita community is more marginalized and more precarious. Some, for example, started their history of migration with a debt, and that debt weighed heavily, and sometimes even prohibited any accumulation of money from these travels. Now, regarding the type of jobs they find, they usually work in constructions or agriculture or manufacturing industries, such as working in slaughterhouses. As I said, most migration is circulatory, is a back and forth movement from Romania to countries such as Germany, Italy, Belgium, Spain, and so on. And this is not necessarily done by choice. The reason is mostly the type of jobs they find. Mostly informal, mostly seasonal, low-skilled work, and usually in highly exploitatory conditions. For example, I talk with people that experience missed payments, changes to agreed terms, or even different forms of coercions. The Roma migrants experience a lot of unpredictability in their work. They never know when or where the next job is going to be, and they are highly dependent on relations and networks of migrants to find work. When they are no longer needed, they have to return home and wait for the next opportunity. And this brings me to another issue that I think is very important to discuss, which is the inability to save and invest the money they earn from these travels, because many use the money to sustain themselves in this period of unemployment, but also they use money to support their family back home. So working without a contract means that sometimes they get cheated and they don't get paid, which also prohibits any accumulation of money in time. And that is the unfortunate reality of many migrants.
Thank you, dear Hestia, for joining us and sharing a bit about your work. And now for our listeners, if you enjoyed this little talk, we invite you to follow for future interviews and share our content.